What's up, Internet? This is Rambling Josh, and you're watching another episode of Let's Play Pokemon Red. So since last time, I have caught a Weedle and a Pidgey, and leveled Charmander up to level 12. I did say I was going to catch a Rattata, and I am going to do that, but I figured I would demonstrate it just because. Perhaps you somehow don't know how to catch a Pokemon. Hopefully this is a Rattata. Indeed it is. So basically, all you gotta do is use a Pokeball. Now there are a lot of things that go into determining whether or not a Pokemon is successfully caught. Specifically, there are three main aspects to it. There is the enemy's health, there is any status effects on the enemy, and there is the strength of your, or not the strength, but what Pokeball you're currently using. There's actually one other thing, but I'll get to that in a moment. The entire formula is actually pretty complicated, and especially in Generation 1 games, it's very, it's got a lot of kind of strange parts to it. But basically, the lower at health the enemy is at, the higher chance you have of catching them, and if the enemy has status effects on them, that also increases the chance. In future generations, status effects apply like multiplicatively, so the more status effects, the higher chance the higher your catch chance is raised. But that's not the case in Generation 1. So in Generation 1, as long as the Pokemon is asleep or frozen, then they will always have the same catch chance, no matter how much health they have, which is kind of strange. And another quirk of Generation 1 games. The other thing, which is the biggest reason why that Pidgey, well, or that Rattata, but also the Pidgey and the Weedle were so easy to catch, I didn't even bother lowering their health, is because each Pokemon has a capture rate. And that determines how difficult it is to capture that particular Pokemon. Is there anything else to mention on that matter? I don't think so. Well, whatever. If we come over here, it is time for our rival duel. Indeed I do not. Indeed they did. Now, unfortunately, unless you've done a lot of training, or at least a little bit of training, the difficulty of this fight tends to be a little bit random. The biggest reason is down to this Pidgey here, who you will fight in both Pokemon Red and Blue. So, the AI really likes to use this sand attack, which of course lowers your accuracy, and in so doing, it makes the effectiveness of your Pokemon a little bit random. So yeah, I just missed. And if that happens a lot, or in a bad situation, then things get kinda nasty. Things are not going particularly well for me. I, of course, have to use Charmander to kill both of his Pokemon, so... Or, what I maybe should have done is switched in one of my other guys and tried to do a little bit of damage before they died. And our opponent now knows a water-type attack, so that's going to be a lot of damage against us. Fortunately, they don't use it every time. Seems like a good time to use a potion. It's either that or reset and try again. It's not imperative that you win this fight. If you lose, you just lose half of your money and go back to the Pokemon Center, but you don't get a chance to do this fight over again. So, gotta make it count. Come on, kill him. Yeah. That didn't go quite as well as I would have liked. Ideally, that Pidgey would have died a lot quicker. It got a chance to do a lot of damage to me before I got to the Squirtle. What I will say is that I'm pretty sure, well, if you chose Squirtle and your rival has a Bulbasaur, I'm pretty sure Bulbasaur doesn't learn a grass-type attack until level 13, I want to say? I could be wrong about that. Well, no. I think it learns Leech Seed at a low level, but that's not like a high damage attack. That's more of an annoyance than anything. So you have to be a little bit less careful if you chose Squirtle, but both Charmander and Squirtle will learn their elemental attacks, or whatever you want to call them, at low enough level that they will have that attack ready for that encounter there. So anyways, now that that is taken care of, it's back to the Viridian Forest. We need to make our way through here to get to the next town. Just gonna dodge around the grass here. Those little Pokeballs you see there, those are obviously items, but we can't access those quite yet. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how, while I'm making my way through the forest here, I want to talk a little bit about how stats work in this game. In Pokemon games, there tend to be a lot of like hidden stats in terms of like the catch rate, and in future generations, there's a lot of stuff about like style and happiness and all that. But when it comes down to it, in Generation 1, there are 5 core stats. You have, obviously, HP, which speaks for itself, and then you have attack, defense, speed, and special. So speed determines which Pokemon acts first in each given round. But the other ones, to explain, I need to kind of talk a little bit about how separate attacks work in this game. So every attack is broken down into normal, or maybe not normal, but like physical or special type damage. Wow, I went a long time without getting into a fight there. That's actually perhaps kind of unfortunate. I don't know. So physical attacks come down to stuff that it uses your Pokemon's body, basically, to deal straight up damage. Stuff like Scratch. And special attacks are things like Ember. These are attacks that use like an elemental thing, something like a fireball or an ice beam or whatever, to do damage. And the reason they're broken up like that is because physical attacks, their damage is augmented by your strength, and the amount of damage you take is augmented by your defense. And special attacks use the special stat. In Generation 1, the special stat applies to both your special attack as well as your special defense, but in future generations they're broken up into 2 different stats. So that makes things a little bit odd in Generation 1. The other thing about Generation 1 is that, unfortunately, the way that attacks are broken up are a little bit weird. Like, maybe not the way that they're broken up, but essentially, when it comes down to it, there are very few attacks that are physical, that are not just a normal type attack. So that's kind of unfortunate and kind of strange. So it ends up essentially being the special is your efficiency with elemental attacks, and attack is how good you are at normal type attacks. And the reason I'm explaining all this will become apparent in the near future. Right now I'm just looking around the forest here a little bit. I'm trying to get a little bit more experience, but I'm also trying to find one of 2 different types of Pokemon here. One is a Pikachu, which I've already not caught, but found. I encountered one on the last episode. And the reason for that is just, well, it's more interesting running to a Pikachu than a Weedle. And if you, as I mentioned before, it could be a good idea to catch a Pikachu, especially if you're playing Red version. Oh. Speak of the devil. And you are using Charmander, I am personally not going to bother. But the thing to point out about this is the one danger with using your starter Pokemon almost exclusively and that's that it can actually get too strong. At least when it comes to catching Pokemon. So as you can see, I basically had no chance of lowering its health. So my only chance of capturing that Pikachu basically came down to if I could do it from full health with the Pokeball. The other thing I was hoping to find was a Kakuna, but it doesn't seem to be obliging me, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's just nothing we can really do about that. I think that's enough for now. The reason I wanted to find a Kakuna was basically just to point out that Kakunas are very good for leveling up on. In particular, if you have a Pokemon like, say, a Pikachu, who is at a very low level, then Kakunas are really good, and the same goes for in Pokemon Blue or Yellow. The same applies to Metapods. They're very good for leveling up because, for one, they don't have any attacks. I think in Pokemon Yellow some of them do, but for the most part, they don't have any attacks. And the other reason is because they give a lot of experience. They're an evolved form of Weedle and Caterpie, respectively, so Kakunas and Metapods, because they're evolved, they give a lot of experience. So here we have the first Pokemon Gym. No thanks. Didn't I say no? So, in a gym, each gym has a leader, who is this dude, and they typically also have trainers. I like to take out most or all of the trainers just for the experience. Now, each gym typically follows a specific element, or not element, but Pokemon type. Brock uses Rock-type Pokemon. Unfortunately, his trainer decides that he wants to use Ground types, which is kind of strange, but they're pretty similar, I guess. The biggest difference between Ground type and Rock type Pokemon is that Rock types tend to have exceptionally high defense, which makes sense, but not all Ground types do. That Diglett we fought does not have high attack power, or defense, whereas the Sandshrew does. And that's why I'm using Ember, because Ember uses Special for its damage calculations, and Ground types typically don't have a high Special stat. So I'm more likely to do high damage, or higher damage at least, with a Special type attack. Indeed it does. So now I'm a little weakened up, so I'm going to go back to the Pokemon Center real quick. Okay, so I'm all healed up and ready to go. Now, the reason I explained the whole... I might as well say it before I do this, because it's usually a good idea. I was kind of hoping to get Charmander up to level 16 before fighting Brock, but whatever. Now, as I was saying, part of the reason that I wanted to explain the stats a little bit is because of this fight. So it's kind of interesting if you choose Charmander, because Rock types are strong against fire, and that means two things. That means that fire attack, like Ember, if we use it, it'll say it's not very effective, which is rather unfortunate. And it also means that, well, we can also see that normal attacks aren't very effective and they do even less damage. So, that is because of the stat stuff that I explained earlier. Rock types, they have a very high defense, and they don't typically have very much special. So what that means is that even though... well, that was kind of unfortunate. Even though fire attacks are not effective against ground types, they can still do decent damage because... or, rock, not ground. Because rock attacks, or rock Pokemon rather, don't have a very high special stat. Charmander's special stat isn't particularly high either, but he can still do decent damage in this case. That could be interesting. In this particular situation, it might be beneficial to use Leer a whole bunch, since Leer lowers the opponent's defense, but I'm just going to stick to Ember. Now the other thing to note is that typically rock-type attacks, well, not typically, always, rock-type attacks are super effective against fire types, which means that if one of these guys were to use a rock-type attack against my Charmander here, it would do a lot of damage. So that can be very problematic. But luckily for us, none of the Pokemon that Brock have actually know any ground-type attacks. So it basically comes down to whether or not you can get around their defense is what determines if you can beat them or not. So we take out Brock, we get the Boulder Badge. Not that I know Flash. And each gym leader will also give you a TM. A TM has the ability to teach a specific ability to a Pokemon that it's compatible with. And it explains what the ability does. You just take some damage, and on the next turn, whatever damage you take, or whatever damage you took in the first turn, it is repaid in double. It seems like it would be a pretty good attack, but for the most part I find that it's not that useful. There's some exceptions. Onix knows Bide, or not by default, but Brock's Onix knows Bide. Gym leaders, the TM that they give you is always an ability that their Pokemon know. And Onix is a pretty good choice for Bide. It's usually good for Pokemon that are able to soak up a lot of damage, which Onix can do, but for rock types it doesn't work so well because their defense typically reduces the damage taken anyways, so it kind of negates the effect. So now that we're done in Pewter City, there are some other things in there in Pewter City to look at, but nothing we can actually do right now. So we're going to start coming this way over to the east and make our way towards the next town, ever so slowly. Before we can do that though, there are a whole bunch of trainers that we have to take out. Now one of the things that you're going to start noticing is that trainers tend to lean towards specific types of Pokemon. So the first trainers that we fought were in the Viridian Forest there, and they were all bug catchers, and they used exclusively bug type Pokemon. I believe there's actually another bug trainer up ahead. So Charmander grew to level 16, which is a very big level for Charmander, and we will see why in a moment. So this is a Lass, and Lasses tend to use what are, I guess, considered cute Pokemon. So they'll use stuff like Pidgeys. I don't think they'll use Rattatas, but they'll use, yeah, that kind of stuff. I think they tend to like fire types sometimes, but actually that may not be the case. And because Charmander reached level 16 at the end of the battle, he is evolving. And he is now a Charmeleon. And that does a couple things for him. For one, just right off the bat, it gives your Pokemon a little bit of a stat boost, which is handy. The other thing is that higher evolutions of a Pokemon, they tend to have a higher stat growth. So every time they level up, they will gain a little bit more stats than their unevolved form. So Charmeleon's stats are going to be going up a little bit faster than Charmander's did. There is, however, one downside to evolving a Pokemon, and I would say it's fairly small, but it's still there. So here's another bug catcher. We can see he's using bugs. And the downside is that the level that you learn certain abilities is adjusted as you evolve. So say Charmander would learn an ability at level 20. Charmeleon can still learn that same ability, but he would learn it at, say, maybe level 24 or something like that. So as you evolve, you get stronger, but the frequency, like, not the frequency, but the level that you learn abilities at goes up a little bit. so you end up having to wait a little bit longer to get the high power abilities. It's still a good trade-off, because in the long run, it's significantly better to have those, the extra stats. It doesn't really make that much difference if you end up having to wait a little bit longer to get certain abilities. It can make a difference in the extreme short term, but it's not really worth it. So here we have a youngster. Youngsters tend to stick to Rattatas and Pidgeys, and I think they use Spearows sometimes, stuff like that. Actually, that's one thing I didn't mention. I believe that in the yellow version of the game, your rival will not have a Pidgey. I think I mentioned that your rival has Pidgey in red and blue, but in yellow, your rival will have a Spearow instead. And that's not particularly important right now, but in the long term, your rival, kind of like I'm doing, your rival tends to stick to the same Pokemon. So that means that your rival, in red and blue, he will have a Pidgey for basically the entire game, every time you fight him. Whereas in yellow, he will have a Spearow for every fight. So this is a pretty annoying attack going on here. The Ekans is using Wrap, and I believe the way Wrap works is that it does a small amount of damage, but it has a chance, it hits a random number of times, from I think 3 to 5, or something like that. Level up. So Wrap can be pretty annoying, especially if it's a fast Pokemon doing it. So, a few fights down the drain, and back to the Pokemon Center to rest up. And we're good to go. Now at this point, it's a good idea to start thinking about the next gym leader in line, and making preparations as necessary. So the next gym leader uses Water-type Pokemon, which can be very problematic if you have a Charmander. It's not a problem at all if you have a Bulbasaur or a Pikachu, and it's just kind of meh, whatever, if you have Squirtle. And the preparations that you want to make are... you basically need to make sure you have a Pokemon that is able to deal with the Pokemon that you're going to be fighting. So obviously, like I said, Bulbasaur and Pikachu, they can handle it all on their own, basically without any extra attention paid. Squirtle is probably going to be just fine, because Squirtle is not weak to water, which, like Charmander, or in this case Charmeleon, is. But when it comes to preparing for the water types, there isn't a whole lot in terms of options. Basically, your only option is to catch a wild Pikachu from the Viridian Forest, and then train it up to like level, I want to say low to mid 20s. Which can be a big pain in the butt. The other thing you can do, though, is what I'm going to be doing is basically just focusing on using Charmander, or Charmeleon, I should really start calling him Charmeleon, is focusing on using him exclusively. Get him to a very high level. Here's an Epic Kakuna. Trainer Pokemon also give more experience than wild Pokemon when you kill them. So that Weedle gave 99 experience, and this Kakuna is probably going to give like 250-ish, I would say. Wow, I was way off. But still, 136 experience is quite good. So where was I? So yeah, I'm going to be focusing on leveling up Charmeleon exclusively. And there's one other thing I'm going to be doing in the near future. Probably on the next episode, not this one. That's going to make a big difference, and going to make the whole strategy possible. But aside from Pikachu and just kind of powering your starter Pokemon, there isn't a whole lot by way of options. Most of the Pokemon that you can catch at this point in the game are very bad. There is one Pokemon in the area coming up that is good and worth catching. I'm not going to be doing it, but the biggest thing to note is that even though it's a good Pokemon that's worth catching, it is not by any means. It's like basically the worst possible Pokemon to take on a water type. So specifically, in the next area we can catch a rock type Pokemon called Geodude. You may recall it as a Pokemon that Brock had. And Geodude is quite good. He has really high defense, which comes very helpful. That was a very bad statement. It comes very helpful. But the problem is, rock types are also weak against water. And more to the point, a lot of Pokemon are what are referred to as dual types. So you can see on the right there it says Type 1 Fire. Whereas I think Weedle, yeah, it's Type 1 Bug, Type 2 Poison. That means that they have two types, which affects the way that damage calculations are done in terms of like what attacks you're strong against, what attacks you're weak against. So Geodude is dual typed, it's part rock and part ground. And the reason that's a big problem, not even just against water types, but also against grass types. And no, I think just those two. The problem is that because both rock and ground types are weak against water and grass, it means that rather than taking double damage from those attacks, Geodude takes quadruple damage, which basically means as soon as he gets hit by a water or grass attack, he just immediately dies. Which obviously you can work around, but it's less than useful against a water gym leader. And if you do catch a Geodude, you're probably going to want to level it up, and any experience you give to a Geodude is not going to your Charmeleon. So I want to say real quick, because this trainer coming up right here is actually extremely annoying. I'm pretty sure you can catch Geodude in the tall grass here, before even going to the next area, but I'm not gonna bother. So this trainer uses a Jigglypuff. They're not particularly noteworthy in any real way, except for their ability to use Sing. Jigglypuffs are the first Pokemon you're going to encounter which has the ability to put your Pokemon to sleep, which can be very annoying. Okay, well I don't care about Disable, I'm not going to be using a Leer. So basically, every turn you have a chance, I'm not sure what that chance is, but you have a chance to wake up, or you could just, stay asleep and just get pounded on, literally. This is not going very well for me at all. That's what, 5 times I've failed to to wake up? This is not going well for me, and ooh, that actually works out very well for me indeed. I was gonna say I'm just going to die and then reload my game, but that ended up turning around for me at the last moment. And am I in the clear? I think I might be. I think that guy's a trainer, but we can just... Oh no, I guess not. We can just walk around him. I guess we made it. And right here on the other side is a Pokemon Center, which is very convenient. Now the other thing to mention is that I believe... let me just see here. Yeah. So in the tall grass in this area, you can catch Geodudes, but you can also catch Spearows. So this area is ideal, just because it's right near the Pokemon Center. That's not a Spearow, that's a Pidgey. And the reason I mentioned that you can catch a Spearow is because Spearow is one of the few, I want to say, Pokemon that actually has a flying type attack. So unlike Pidgey, whose Gust is, for whatever reason, normal type. Here we go, here's a Spearow. I'm not gonna catch it, but you can see that they exist. Spearows, their default attack is Peck, which is actually flying type. So that's something that you might want to keep in mind. A flying type can be useful to have around. They're super effective. Flying attacks are super effective against bug types and fighting types, and I think that's it. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. I don't particularly care about that. My Charmander's, or Charmeleon's Ember covers bug types just fine, and bug types are usually not even worth worrying about. And I'm going to have better options for flying or fighting types later on. So I might as well heal up again, just because why not? Also, I don't think Spearows, they're not super good long term. They can be pretty decent, but nothing super special. There is one other reason to go for a flying type that is going to be somewhat disadvantageous to me in the future, but that's just something I'm going to have to deal with. For now, I'm going to leave it here for today on Let's Play Pokemon Red. Catch you later.